You are listening to WRFG Atlanta. WRFG provides a voice for those who have been traditionally denied open access to the broadcast media through the involvement of a broad base of community elements to guarantee that access. In the utilization of the facilities and its programs, the following communities will receive first priority: those who continue to be denied free and open access to the broadcast media, and those who suffer oppression or exploitation based upon class, race, sex, age, creed, disability, sexual orientation, or immigrant status.
My name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace. I'm here with co-producer Ernest Dunkley, and this evening we're going to be talking with Ray McClendon from the NAACP about voting issues and voting challenges right now in the state of Georgia. I need to begin by saying that the opinions expressed on Just Peace do not necessarily reflect those of Radio Free Georgia Broadcasting Foundation Incorporated, its board, staff, or volunteers. So welcome, Ray. We're so pleased to have you this evening.
Thank you so much, Heather. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, wonderful. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right, sure, I'd be happy to. I'll give the short version of it. I'm a Georgia native, born in Griffin, Georgia, Spalding County. Went to Morehouse College here in Atlanta, as well as Georgia State University. Got my BA in Business Administration from Morehouse and MBA from Georgia State. I've been involved in banking, finance, entrepreneurship for several decades here in Georgia and across the country. Have been involved in major economic development projects from the state and local level of public-private partnerships, as well as with the Federal National Mortgage Association, Fannie Mae. I've been active in politics for many years. I was treasurer of Maynard Jackson's campaign when he ran for mayor for his third term. Proud to serve in that capacity, and also I worked for the city of Atlanta during his first two terms. I've been active with the 100 Black Men of Atlanta, as it's proud to serve as its president back about 2 decades ago, and I've been the political action chairman for the NAACP Atlanta branch now for a little over 5 years.
Oh my goodness, you have a remarkable background. So what got you involved in politics like this, Ray? This activism?
Well, we know that in the African American community, we've all been challenged by our parents and ancestors that we are set here on this earth to make a difference. One of the ways that many of us went was the civil rights movement initially. I got involved in public service with the opportunity to serve as a civil servant. Got to know then many elected officials from not just the mayor of Atlanta, but many of the Atlanta City Council members. Q.V. Williamson, who is the first Black City Council member in Atlanta since Reconstruction, was a mentor of mine. And it was always a commitment to giving back in whatever way that you possibly could. And so politics was an effective way that I saw I could use my skills to help make a difference in my community.
Thank you for sharing that. I do want to say, before we talk about the contemporary voting issues here, is that I remember also, of course, when Maynard Jackson first became the first Black mayor of Atlanta, and what a transformation it was, Ray. And people were coming in, Black folks were coming in from all over the country because they wanted to work in his administration. It was an exciting
That's exactly right. Yes, you're right. I'm sorry to cut you off. You're absolutely right. No, I was just going to say that it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the best of times because African Americans felt that their voices were finally being heard to help elevate along with progressive people of all backgrounds to raise him to that office in 1973. And it did open up a whole new migration of entrepreneurs and those seeking opportunities, especially among Black folks, to come to Atlanta and put a stake in the ground. so that was a great time. However, it was also a difficult time because many in the white community were nervous about being under Black leadership, and therefore the white migration took shape in earnest. Most people in Atlanta know, but many people outside of Atlanta don't realize that the majority of Black folks lived in one portion of the city on the west side and the inner circle of the east side primarily, but was enveloped by the white community, and essentially all of those areas outside of the traditional west side Atlanta communities was white neighborhoods. All of those folks moved. So what we traditionally think of as the Black community in Atlanta now, it was primarily due to white flight. So we've now come full circle after 40 years that now we've got that out migration has been reversed, and you're seeing now many people moving back in, white folks moving back into those communities after that flight out back in the 70s.
So I wonder, is that a good thing or no?
Well, I think it can be a good thing. I think what we've got to do, though, as a community, and I know the mayor is working on this diligently, it's critical that we have affordable housing, workforce housing available so that what I describe as legacy residents will be able to continue to afford to live in the neighborhoods that they have resided in for many, many years. Many grew up in those neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods are gentrifying now at an accelerated rate. So one of the big policy issues we have is how are we going to continue to find creative, innovative ways of building housing and establishing rent levels and home ownership opportunities that our low and moderate income people can afford.
Ernest, do you have some questions of Ray about this? Some of this history?
Actually, it's a very interesting history. And I'm still formulating some thinking on that, realizing that some of these contemporary Black neighborhoods were not very long ago white neighborhoods. This is new to me because at that time in the 70s, I was still in Brooklyn, I believe. So, and this gives another turn at things for me. I live in one of these communities, and I'm noticing the people moving in the area behind the stadium, the old Bears State, the old stadium here, is now quickly becoming gentrified, and the dynamics are quite interesting. And as Ray was saying, everyone really has a right to use these municipal spaces. And we really have to understand that and work at carving out a piece of this, very much the way the Chinese have in many communities. I'm very happy with the one in New York, which is called Chinatown, but that community in itself is a piece of work to watch how the Chinese have, without the help of the American government, who has treated them as cruelly as us, have managed to secure that property. That property that they secure is right in the shadow of Wall Street, which makes it the most expensive property in the country. However, the Chinese occupy it, and they're still living in their old building. They bought that neighborhood. They bought those neighborhoods, and they can't be moved legally. And we have to understand the power of working together, because they have a banking system that's outside of our banking system, a cooperative system. I understand many of the systems within Chinatown are cooperative, and they're doing very well at these times when gentrification is coming in and dissolving old communities.
Interesting. Well, thanks for that.
Access to capital is a critical component of maintaining upward mobility in our communities, and is one of the fundamental reasons why there continues to be a wealth gap that's so dramatic between the African American community and the white community in Georgia and indeed in the entire nation. And that's been a fundamental part of systemic racism throughout our entire history. And a microcosm of it has always been on display right here in Atlanta and in Georgia.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned.
WRFG and the Carrie Steele Pitts Foundation celebrate Black History Month.
Lonnie George Johnson, born October 6, 1949, is an African-American inventor, aerospace engineer, and entrepreneur whose work includes a U.S. Air Force term of service and 12-year stint at NASA, where he worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He invented the Super Soaker water gun in 1990, which has been among the world's best-selling toys ever since, and he also invented the Nerf gun, which he patented as a pneumatic launcher for toy projectile, revolutionizing toy blasters. Johnson is part of a small group of African-American inventors whose work accounts for 6% of all U.S. patent applications. He helped invent the stealth bomber and the Galileo mission to Jupiter. One of his most notable quotes is, "There is no short, easy route to success."
This has been another public service announcement from your station for progressive information, WRFG 89.3.
We are now returning to our discussion with Ray McClendon from the NAACP about Black financial institutions.
We have always had challenges with creating Black-owned financial institutions and being able to sustain those institutions over time. And in fact, we've seen Black banks decline from almost 120 Black banks down now to just before the Great Recession back in 2008 to now. There are only 19 African American owned banks left in the United States. So that's one of the big challenges that we have is how do we build access to capital so that we have our own institutions to build wealth in our communities. And consistent with what we were just talking about in terms of affordable housing, one of the critical ways, as you all know, in America of wealth building is through home ownership. And that has been denied to many of African American citizens because of overt systemic racism and redlining that has occurred for many years and decades across the country.
Well, thanks for that, Ray. I do want to, I'd like to in the future have more of a discussion about that as well. But today we want to talk primarily about voting issues and what on earth is happening in Georgia. So would you tell us a little bit what are the things that the NAACP is concerned about?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, it's no surprise nor shock to us. We actually predicted that there would be an extreme backlash to the successful voter participation that occurred from the Black community in both the general election on November 3rd and the two Georgia runoffs. And we have seen the forces of voter suppression and Jim Crow come out in full force after its own citizenry in the past 2 weeks during the legislative session. First in the Senate, they have introduced over almost 40 bills that have some form of voter suppression, from increasing voter ID requirements to eliminating drop boxes, eliminating certain days of early voting, eliminating mobile voting opportunities where certain counties had the opportunity, like Fulton County, to be able to have mobile voting units that could go to a polling location where there were problems with machines or resources. Then one of the bills in particular eliminates no excuse absentee balloting altogether. So all of those bills started, and we've been aggressive with identifying those bills and galvanizing opposition to those bills in the Senate. In the House, just this past week on Wednesday, or on Thursday, the House dropped an omnibus bill that essentially incorporates all of the bad components of the Senate bills and dropped it all in one bill in the House, and was moving rapidly to vote on that. Fortunately, we had some advocates in the House Select Committee, Special Election Integrity Committee, that understand how important it is to let voices be heard. We had our president, Richard Rose, spoke at a hearing that they brought together, and there'll be more hearings and possibly later on in the week. So what we're doing now is we're galvanizing all of our community partners that work with us to turn out this historic vote in November and in January, and now reasserting that coalition to let our voices be heard with our state legislators, that we see what they're attempting to do. They're moving the goalposts once again, because these issues were not a problem, or there were no issues to be called problems. As Richard Rose suggested, these are solutions in search of problems. And we're going to fight this all the way, because we know the only reason the goalposts are being moved is because Black voters and progressive voters utilize the system that was established in 2005 that allowed expanded absentee voting, early voting, et cetera.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit before we go into an in-depth discussion about these changes they want to make. Tell us about the configuration of the Georgia legislature, both the Senate and the House. It's controlled by Republicans, right?
Well, as in many of the state legislatures across the South and indeed across the country now, because of gerrymandering, the state legislatures the state government, period, is controlled by Republicans. So they control the governor's office, both the Senate and the House chambers in Georgia, and that's similar in many, many states now. And that creates some challenges. In Georgia, of course, we meet here every year in the state legislature. Bills can be introduced by senators, and there's something here in the state called crossover. So senators can introduce their bills, deliberate them, and then pass them, but they must be passed by a certain day, which is called crossover day, so that then the other chamber has an opportunity to review those bills and then potentially approve or oppose them. So what's going on now is each separate chamber is drafting their own bills. They can either make it out of committee, get voted up or down, or they could die in committee. But those that cross over then after a date certain, and that date will probably be this coming weekend, that crossover will occur, and then we'll know exactly which bills will have an opportunity to actually become law, be passed by both houses, and then become law if the governor signs them. They are just blatant and brazen attempts at 21st century voter suppression.
Oh, that's discouraging, Ray. So now...
Well, it's discouraging, Heather, but by the same token, people are engaged. People are energized from the success from November, and then subsequently on January the 5th. And people were already calling us at the NAACP saying, hey, we were so happy that we made a difference on January the 5th. Look what we can do when we come together in unity and collaborate. And so they were already hankering to go at what's next. Well, here it is. This is what's next for us to reassert the communication and collaboration that we had going for the elections ensure that we're going to hold these elected officials accountable. So it's a big task, but people are excited to go for that challenge.
Well, that's a good point. I agree that people are really excited about what happened in Georgia, and there was certainly a lot of enthusiasm and efforts in that runoff election. That's just absolutely for sure. So I want to ask you also, would you please explain gerrymandering? What is that exactly?
Okay, so basically what gerrymandering is that legislatures have the authority to create the districts for congressional seats as well as for their state electoral seats for the House, for the state House and Senate. And so essentially what has occurred, there's always been some form of structuring the districts in a way that could benefit to some degree politically. What the Republican Party began doing a decade ago was using computer algorithms to determine the absolute optimal way for the Republican Party to control districts to its benefit and to the detriment of Democrats, primarily through the way that you put together each one of these districts where you parsed out voters to dilute Democratic strength and dilute African American and other people of color's impact on the vote. Now, as you know, from the Voting Rights Act, that was being able to do that based upon race was supposedly illegal.
So actually, Ray, we're talking about Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, right?
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
So,
Go ahead.
so what has occurred now, though, is that since the Shelby Supreme Court case won, and the highly sophisticated way that these different state legislatures have been able to maneuver in these states, more and more gerrymandering has occurred to the extent that in many states now, the Republican Party can control a majority of seats, even though they're losing a majority of the votes. So another way to look at it is the elected officials are getting to choose their voters as opposed to voters choosing their elected officials. We think that's inherently wrong. We think that what that is doing is creating further polarization in this country. And that's true on the left and the right. In other words, it used to be where you would have a cross-section of voters with a variety of political positions. And so it made the political discourse have to come more to the center in order to cobble together a coalition that would produce a majority and therefore success in an election. Now, neither side has to worry as much about the center versus having to worry about getting primaried either from the left or the right. And therefore, we have no compromise. We have greater polarization. And this is only going to continue to stagnate our political systems and drive more people to get frustrated and drop out of the political process.
So there's a lot of discussion about people who are concerned about the issues regarding the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, that was altered. When was that? What year was that? I'm trying to remember.
2013, I believe.
2013, yes. So I know that there's a lot of discussion about wanting to get that back into the Voting Rights Act, right?
Yes.
All over the country, I'm hearing this. We need to get Section 5 back. What's your opinion about that?
Well, there's several things going on, and I'm not the expert on all of the federal legislation, but I will say that there are multiple levels to this. And what we know that's matriculating through Congress right now are several bills that will help us across the board in voter suppression, in anti-gerrymandering, and election protection. So the number one bill, of course, there's the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that everyone wants to see passed.
Is that Voting Rights Act very similar to Section 5?
It includes elements of it, but again, I'm not the expert on that bill.
No problem.
I'm more conversant in HR 1, which is the For the People Act. And that bill is currently going, as I said, moving through the House. And that bill is a high priority for us as well, because we believe that bill will solve a lot of the problems that we're having, not only on gerrymandering, but also on all of these other voter suppression techniques that are being employed by the state legislatures across the country.
You're listening to the Just Peace program on WRFG Atlanta, 89.3 on the FM dial. So what are some other examples?
Well, examples in HR 1, first of all, HR 1 would expand the ability, would standardize early voting on all federal elections so that there would be a minimum time period of at least a little over a couple of weeks as a minimum. There would be also minimum standards for voter registration, and also allowing for automatic voter registration, as we have had here in Georgia recently, where anybody getting a driver's license would be registered. They would have to opt out of it. There would be also standardized redistricting procedures, so that redistricting would be done by independent commissions as opposed to by politicians of any party. And so those are the types of provisions that would give us the power to take a lot of the politics out of the process, which leads to voter suppression. And it would also take the capacity for politicians to select their own voters, as opposed to voters selecting their politicians, which would then dampen the move toward more polarization in our politics. HR 1 is a huge bill. Now there's some other areas too.
And HR 1 is before Congress now. Is that correct?
HR 1 is, but since the key elections are federal, which the federal government has control over, standardizing federal elections would in many ways convert the entire system. And so we can take at least the federal elections out. And when you look at it, those were the critical elections that gerrymandering has impacted tremendously. For state governments still would have the power to gerrymander on a state or local level. However, it would be extremely costly for them to have a bifurcated system where you had one system of voter registration, polling and dates for federal qualifications and another for state qualifications. We believe that HR 1 is a tremendous way to standardize the process of eliminating some of these alleged voter suppression techniques from our voting system.
Okay, so Ray, what I'd like to do, and Ernest, please jump in here, whatever, but what I'd like to do is go over some of these items that the Georgia legislature, the Senate and the House of Representatives are wanting to pass. And if people are concerned about this, they can call their legislators, right? One way or the other, if they're supportive of it or if they're against it. But let's talk about this first item, which is require license or ID number. So let me read the whole thing. Require license or ID number when requesting and returning absentee ballots. So what's the issue with that?
Well, again, the issue with that is that it's going to require, especially among people who don't have driver's license, and there are 10% of people in Georgia who don't. to have some other form of ID in order to request an absentee ballot. Once again, we're talking about a solution in search of a problem. We've had 100% recount in the presidential election. We had audit of over 15,000 ballots on to review absentee ballots in Cobb County as an audit test case. And we have found the state found no problems, fraud, or abuse of the mail-in voting process. There were only two issues that came up in the Cobb County audit, and neither one of those was related to fraud. They were a couple of issues that were just clerical errors. So, innocent errors. So the whole notion that we need to now strengthen these provisions as if there is some kind of massive fraud that impacted the election is just a total fabrication. So we're saying don't put more onerous provisions on voters, a significant portion of which of the electorate does not have access to what you're requiring.
And the other thing is, according to you said about what happened in the last election, it's not necessary to do something like that.
That's the point. That's exactly the point.
Let's go on to the next one. Limit mobile voting sites.
Okay, again, you want to limit mobile voting sites. One of the challenges we have.
Explain what a mobile voting site is.
A mobile voting site is that in Fulton County in particular, they were able to create a mobile set of machines that was in a bus that went around to different locations, and essentially it was available for any kind of problems that occurred at a particular location. You had the ability to mobilize these additional voting machines via this bus, so that people wouldn't have to stand in long lines while the machines that had malfunctioned or whatever other capacity issue occurred was being taken care of. Now, of course, for the most part, only the larger counties have the kind of budget resources to acquire these buses and dedicate those machines. So some people felt like, well, that's giving some kind of competitive advantage to those counties that have those buses available. So to quote unquote level the playing field, they wanted to take those buses away from the ones who could afford to do it and wanted to do it, because everyone couldn't do it, which to me makes no sense. If you have a larger county with larger voter population, where the potential for problems is larger just due to sheer volume, why not have some mobile capability? That's almost like saying, well, you shouldn't be able to use State Farm Arena or Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Fulton County because you can't do the same thing down in Scriven or Cordele. It just doesn't make any sense. You use the resources that are available when it doesn't give an advantage. It just makes sure that all people have access. We have the longest lines here in the metro area, so why shouldn't we use resources to mitigate some of those challenges?
Wow. So, all right. So the next item is to limit the number of voting booths. That's sort of along the same lines as the mobile voting sites, right?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, it's exactly the same thing. You are stating up front that our objective is to create long lines and frustrate people. And of course, low and moderate income people of color, many of whom are essential workers who cannot afford to take hours off from their jobs to vote, need to know that they can get in and vote and let their voices be heard in as short a time frame as possible. So when people see the lines are long, or many of them in the past have been discouraged and failed to vote. And so that's a clear voter suppression tactic in our view.
Wow. What about this item, limit the time frame to request an absentee ballot application to 11 weeks?
Once again, there has not been a problem with applying early. And as we know, with the challenges we have faced with the U.S. Postal Service, the timing is critical, especially in a pandemic. It has been a challenge to get turnaround on mail. So it's taken over a week for people to have their absentee ballot request received, and it's taken 2, sometimes 3 weeks in order to get the ballot back from the county once the request has gone in. So when you shorten the time frame, when you condense that time frame, then you're just putting more pressure on people to turn that around. You couple that with one of the additional ones you're going to ask about, which is drop boxes, and you are decreasing the number of drop box locations and the time of access to drop box. And all of this clearly, all of these components are clearly nothing but efforts to suppress the vote. There is no legitimate reason, no voter fraud protection reason for shortening the time frame, or for that matter, for eliminating the available time for drop boxes. Once again, solutions in search of a problem.
All right, well, thanks for that. So, okay, the next one is outlaw Sunday early voting.
That's a blatant, direct attack on African American voters who have disproportionately voted on Sundays. As you know, it's called Souls to the Polls. People will go to church or have church during pandemic streaming, and then they are challenged to go out and vote on Sundays. And it's been a very effective tool in the Black community in particular. So taking away Sunday voting is a direct attack to suppress the Black vote.
Wow. All right, the next item is shorten the time for when absentee by mail ballots will be sent from 45 to 25 days before an election.
Yeah, that's combined with what we talked about before. You're compressing the time frame in the middle of a pandemic now. And let's talk about when there hopefully won't be a pandemic in another year or so. We still don't know what the challenges are going to be for the post office. So all you're doing is condensing the time and putting more stress on the voters to have to turn information around when there's no voter fraud protection issue related to that extra time, other than ensuring that they receive a ballot, and then turn it around and know that it's been accepted in a reasonable fashion without stressing someone that they would want to cancel that mail-in ballot because they don't know if it's been received or not.
Okay, so the next one is no government or elections office can directly send an absentee ballot request.
What is the problem with them sending a request out? Why is that? In what way is that a voter fraud challenge?
Well, let me ask you this, Ray. How do people find out about the absentee ballot request information? Where do they get it?
Well, they can get that information from their registrars. We also put information out about that. Again, it is almost if our state government, our state legislature, is trying to curtail information and that will encourage people to vote.
Well, how do they send out the information? What do? They mail it?
No, you have to request it. They're saying you only can request it. A government can't decide on its own to send out the request itself. But what's the fraud issue related to that?
I have no idea.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the point. I know I'm asking a rhetorical question here. There is none. There is no problem with the way that system has worked.
No government or elections official can directly send an absentee ballot request. So who would they be sending the absentee ballot request to? I mean, What does that mean? I just still don't understand what that means.
Okay, that means that Fulton County or DeKalb County can decide that we want to encourage folks to vote by mail in order to reduce the spread of COVID-19.
Right.
So they can send out the applications, which then would inform voters that, hey, you know what, you might not be thinking about this right now, but you can request an absentee ballot by using this form, and that way you can safely and securely make your voice heard.
I guess my question is still, and that's great. Thanks for that, Ray. But where do they send the information? Where does the DeKalb County, where do they send it to them?
They send it to each individual voter.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Okay.
Yeah. So they could. What this is prohibiting them from doing is to be being proactive and saying that if the more absentee ballot request forms we send out, the more we will likely get back, and therefore the more mail-in ballots we will ship out to eligible voters. And what that is doing is increasing the number of mail-in votes, but that also decreases the number of people that will either be early voting or voting on election day. And of course, during these pandemic times, that's a good thing. That cuts the lines, it cuts the transmission, and therefore that's a health issue in the current environment as well.
Exactly.
What your state government is telling you is, we don't want you doing that.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned.
WRFG and the Carrie Steele Pitts Foundation celebrate Black History Month.
Carrie Steele was born a slave around 1829. There is nothing known of her life before emancipation. After the emancipation, she sold baked goodies to make ends meet and eventually secured a job as a stewardess. Today, we would call them a maid or a janitress. Carrie Steele worked as a stewardess and became very concerned about the orphan children running around the depot. Carrie Steele asked her boss at the Union Depot to let a few kids play in the Union boxcars during the day so that she could keep an eye on them, and then took them home to sleep in her cottage at night. In 1889, Carrie married Josiah Logan, and together they took in as many orphans as they could afford. It wasn't long before their cottage was too crowded to take in any more orphans. They raised money through fundraisers and various church donations to build Carrie Steele Orphans Home. Carrie Steele's orphanage developed into a public charity that received monthly stipends from the county and from the city of Atlanta. In 1895, the orphanage housed 140 orphans. Carrie Steele saw a problem and successfully worked with and in the constraints of the time period to accomplish her goals.
This has been another public service announcement from your station for progressive information, WRFG 89.3.
We are now returning to our discussion with Ray McClendon of the NAACP. All right, so this next item is restrict drop box locations to early voting locations only during early voting hours.
I've already alluded to that. There have been no allegations of any type of fraud associated with drop boxes. And once again, the drop boxes have been a safe and secure convenience for people who could not early vote for whatever reason and were concerned about the U.S. Postal Service. So these places that were set up, which have been secure, have been a great convenience to voters. So what the bill would do essentially would set up a system where essentially the only time you use a drop box was where there was early voting going on. So why not just early vote? Why would you go through the process of restricting the boxes to only be used during the hours when there's early voting? You defeated the purpose of the drop box, which was to give them convenience. If I can't get out to early vote, why would you make it restrict my ability to drop my ballot in the drop box to only the time when I could early vote? If I had that ability, I wouldn't have to worry about the ballot drop box. I would just go in and vote if I had that flexibility.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Okay, so let's go to this last item here, which is supervised drop boxes, possibly with law enforcement.
Let's think about that for a minute. We have documented evidence that over the years that using any kind of public safety officials in those situations has been a form of voter intimidation. The challenge is, as I've already stated, is not any potential fraud related to drop boxes. So the presence of law enforcement at these locations is an unnecessary expense that will dissuade people from using drop boxes in many of our communities of color, particularly.
Absolutely. All right. So, as Dr. King would say, where do we go from here? So, for those listening to this program this evening, again, this is a discussion with Ray McClendon of the NAACP. So appreciate your explaining all this to us, Ray. But if people are concerned, what should they do?
Well, first of all, what people should do is we want their voices to be heard. We want them to reach out to their state legislatures, to let them legislators. They can contact the Georgia Senate leadership by calling them at 404-656-5030, or they can call 404-656-6578. That's 656-5030 or 656-6578, and let their voices be heard. They need to know that we are watching. They can also use, if you can put up the link that I shared with you earlier, we are on a letter writing campaign at the NAACP. We are emailing all the members of the Senate Ethics Committee and the House Special Committee for Election Integrity. Those links are in the information that I provided to you. If there's a way for you to put that up on your website, then they can click on that link, or they can call the Atlanta NAACP and get that link directly from us, or email us at info@naacpatlanta.org for that information as well. So the campaign is within 90 seconds. You can have a letter targeted to these people, and all you have to do is put in your name and email address, and it will get a letter out so you can share your voice to oppose these voter suppression measures.
So I just want everyone to know, again, this is the Georgia Protect Voting Rights Act, HB 531. So that's the bill that we're talking about. Now, is this something that is they're attempting this in all these various states, right? Not just Georgia?
This is going on. Yeah, this is going on. There are over 100 bills around the country being introduced primarily by Republican legislatures to restrict to create voter suppression methods in various forms. And these all look very much alike. You can tell that there has been some cross-pollination, if you will, going on between different Republican legislative groups. And so we know it's going on in North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Arizona, as well as Pennsylvania and elsewhere. And surprise, surprise, many of those are battleground states or anticipated to be battleground states in 2022.
Well, clearly they didn't appreciate the results of the last election.
Absolutely. And so, and also one other thing, you are reading from the House bill, but many of these same provisions are in a variety of Senate bills that are in the Senate Ethics Committee. And that's what I was giving you, the Senate leadership. So we are attacking on both sides to let our voices be heard and to make sure that voters' voices are heard. We'll also be having a virtual protest march next Saturday, the 27th at 11 a.m. I'll also share that information with you as well so that you can post that as well.
So where do people get that information apart from you or me? I mean, can they go to a website to get that information?
They can go on the either an NAACP site and get it, or on our Facebook page and get it.
Okay, wonderful. All right, Ernest, I want to know, Ernest, do you have any comments, questions, whatever?
Actually, I don't, because Ray has been very thorough.
Oh, yeah.
The what we can do part, we might really want to work on that for the near future. Writing our representatives, of course, definitely. But what else can we do to be involved? Many of us are really not connected to organizations that may put us to work, as they did during the election times when many different peoples came through my community, alerting us to the necessity for everyone to get on out there and vote. And I imagine over the near future, we're going to have to keep up, as Ray said, the pressure. So we might want to look at other ways to involve citizens that may not be connected to some of the grassroots organizations, to begin to find a way to get in and put their shoulder to the wheel.
Yeah, that's good. All right, Ray, thank you for that, Ernest. Ray, I have just a quick question before we go here. Do the Democrats have any bills in the various state legislatures about any of this?
There are some bills by the Democrats. The problem is with the Republicans having majorities in both houses.
I see. Yeah, right. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay. Very little chance they'll pass.
Okay. So listen, I'm wanting to thank both of you all so much. I think hopefully in the next discussions we have down the road would be about Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. So I'm sure the NAACP is working on that as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'd like to hear more about that as well, right?
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Ray.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take care.
All right.
Yes, do take care. We'll be in touch.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Uncle Tom down. Everywhere I go, there's Uncle Tom down. Uncle Tom, you got to go. When I go to church, there's Uncle Tom down. When I go to work, there's Uncle Tom down. Uncle Tom, oh Uncle Tom, you got to go.